Imagine a time when California's population was booming, 22 million strong, and you could still buy a home for just 2.5 times your salary and find a job in aerospace, entertainment, or agriculture almost overnight. Before tech giants and endless traffic, this was the real endless summer, a golden state where wide-open roads and possibility drew millions west. But why did it feel so attainable? And what changed that dream forever? The answer starts here. Jobs were everywhere in California during the summer of the 1970s. Aerospace plants along the LA basin needed engineers and machinists. Citrus groves and fruit packers hired seasonal workers. Studios and television sets in Burbank buzzed with new productions, and they pulled in carpenters, artists, and camera crews. The unemployment rate in 1974 hovered around 6%, even as the state's population soared past 22 million. For most families, the promise was not just a paycheck, it was stability. You could walk into a union hall or a supermarket and see a help wanted sign. High school graduates landed entry-level jobs that paid enough to start a life. Home ownership felt like a real possibility, not a distant dream. In 1970, the median California house sold for $23,000. Median household income that year was $9,400. That is a price-to-income ratio of 2.45. By 1975, the median home price reached $38,300, with incomes rising to $14,500. Even then, homes averaged only 2.6 times yearly earnings. Compare that to later decades, when the ratio would double or triple. 30-year fixed mortgage rates stayed under 9% for most of the decade, making monthly payments manageable for teachers, mechanics, and nurses alike. New tracts of ranch houses filled the valleys. Orange County and the San Fernando Valley saw neighborhoods bloom almost overnight. Developers offered open houses on weekends, and buyers lined up for a shot at their own backyard and driveway. The dream was tangible: a steady job, a modest home, and a sense that the future was wide open. For millions, California was not just a destination, it was a place where the doors stood open, inviting anyone willing to work to step inside and build a life. A young woman stepped off a Greyhound bus in Hollywood in the summer of 1973 with 2 suitcases, a stack of Polaroids, and $200 saved from waitressing in Fresno. She wasn't alone. Every week, hopefuls like her arrived, drawn by the promise that California's movie capital could turn anyone into something new. The studios didn't care where you came from, only that you showed up on time and worked hard. Entry-level jobs paid about $140 a week for assistants, enough to split rent with roommates in a faded Spanish-style apartment and still buy groceries at the corner market. The hours were long, and the work could be thankless: fetching coffee, answering phones, running scripts across the lot under the beating sun. But the air on Melrose Avenue buzzed with possibility. Sometimes a casting call would go out for extras, and anyone in the right place at the right time might find themselves on set, standing just out of frame as history unfolded. For every overnight star, there were 100 more behind the scenes, making costumes, painting sets, splicing film in dark editing rooms. On weekends, she and her friends pooled tips to catch a double feature at the Cinerama Dome, or listen to up-and-coming bands play on the Sunset Strip. The city was full of stories, and everyone believed they could write their own. In the 1970s, Hollywood was less about fame and more about the chance to start over. The system wasn't closed to outsiders. If you were willing to work, there was always a way in through the mailroom, the wardrobe shop, or a friend's recommendation. That spirit drew dreamers from across the country, feeding a creative energy that would shape the music, movies, and style of a generation. For many, the real reward wasn't a star on the sidewalk, but the freedom to become whoever you wanted to be, right under the California sun. In the early 1970s, a plan threatened to cut the California coastline in two. State officials and developers pushed for a multi-lane Pacific Coast Freeway, a project that would have bulldozed through Big Sur and much of the wild open coast. The idea was speed. Move more cars, open more land, make the state even bigger and busier. But Californians pushed back. Local residents, teachers, surfers, artists, and farmers packed public hearings, wrote thousands of letters, and stood shoulder to shoulder along the cliffs. Editorials ran in the Los Angeles Times and the Sacramento Bee, warning that a freeway would erase the very soul of the coast. Environmental groups like the Sierra Club joined the fight, and town halls overflowed with voices demanding that the cliffs, redwoods, and ocean views stay untouched. By 1972, the message was impossible to ignore. Caltrans, the state's highway agency, withdrew its freeway plans for Big Sur. The victory did not stop there. In 1976, California passed the Coastal Act, Senate Bill 1277. The new law drew a hard line. Highway 1 through Big Sur would remain a two-lane scenic road, protected by law from any future widening or expressway expansion. Section 30251 spelled it out. Coastal scenery and habitats had to be preserved, and new development would be tightly controlled. The newly formed Coastal Commission became the guardian of this promise. This was not just a win for activists or politicians. It was a moment when ordinary people, united by a love of place, changed the future of the state. The open road, the wild coastline, and the freedom to drive with the windows down all survived because a community stood up and said no to the bulldozers. That spirit of collective action became part of California's DNA, a reminder that the dream belonged to everyone willing to defend it. On any given Saturday in the 1970s, California felt like a playground with no fences. By breakfast, you could be waxing a surfboard in Huntington Beach, sand still clinging to your feet, the air thick with salt, and the faint sweetness of orange blossoms drifting from inland groves. The Pacific Coast Highway beckoned, two lanes winding along the cliffs, windows down, the eagles on the radio, and the promise of somewhere new just a short drive away. It wasn't just the coastline that felt open. From the suburbs of the San Fernando Valley, families could pack up a station wagon and reach the snowy slopes of Big Bear or Mount Baldy by lunch. Kids swapped wetsuits for ski jackets in the back seat, still damp from the morning waves. The journey itself was part of the ritual, passing through sun-drenched farmland, rolling down windows to catch a sudden chill as the road climbed into the mountains. In a single day, it was possible to surf at sunrise and carve fresh tracks through powder before sunset. Locals called it the surf-to-snow run, a brag that belonged only to this stretch of the world. Travel times were measured not in frustration, but in freedom. A drive from Santa Monica to Big Bear took just over 2 hours if you timed it right. The roads were rarely choked, and the scenery changed with every mile, citrus groves giving way to pine forests, the scent of jasmine replaced by crisp alpine air. These weekend escapes were not reserved for the wealthy. With affordable gas and open highways, the state's wild variety was available to anyone with a set of wheels and a sense of adventure. The landscape was not just beautiful, it was accessible, turning ordinary weekends into memories that still feel golden decades later. The summer of 1976 brought a drought so severe that backyard pools across Southern California turned from blue oases into empty concrete bowls. Water restrictions swept through Los Angeles, Santa Monica, and Beverly Hills. No refills, no hoses, just cracked plaster and the sharp smell of sun-baked chlorine. For most homeowners, these pools were a lost luxury. For a handful of restless kids in Venice and Ocean Park, they were something else entirely, a new frontier. The Dogtown crew, skaters like Tony Alva, Jay Adams, Stacy Peralta, Peggy Oki, and Jim Muir, began sneaking into abandoned yards, hauling out leaves and broken glass, and testing the limits of what a skateboard could do. The pools, mostly kidney-shaped and built in the 1960s, had steep, curving walls and deep ends that let riders build speed, carve tight arcs, and launch themselves higher than ever before. Every pool had its own personality, its own lines and secrets. The clatter of urethane wheels on tile coping echoed through quiet neighborhoods, a sound that meant the drought had turned into a playground for the bold. Urethane wheels, a new invention just a few years earlier, gripped the concrete in ways the old clay ones never could. Boards got wider, with kicktails and concave shapes, letting riders push harder, turn sharper, and invent tricks that had never been seen. The Zephyr Skate team, known as the Z-Boys, brought surf style to dry land, crouching low, dragging hands, and riding the pool curves like ocean waves. Every session was a test of nerve and creativity. They trespassed, improvised, sometimes ran from the police or angry homeowners, but they always came back for another ride. For Peggy Oki, the only girl on the crew, every pool was a chance to prove that style and guts mattered more than size or strength. For Jim Muir, the drought was a gift. He recalled that they were outlaws, trespassers, but those empty pools made them legends for a summer. The technical advances born in those backyards, better wheels, new board designs, the first aerials, did more than fuel a subculture. They rewrote the rules for what skateboarding could be, turning a California crisis into the birthplace of modern vertical skating. Before the sun even thought about rising, the parking lots at Huntington and Malibu started filling with battered station wagons and old pickups. Headlights cut through the marine layer as boards slid out of trunks and tailgates, foam still cool from the night air. Waxing a board was its own quiet ritual. Circles of sticky wax pressed into fiberglass, hands moving slow and sure, the smell drifting into the salt breeze. Nobody checked the time. The only clock that mattered was the sound of waves breaking just beyond the dark. Surfers gathered in loose clusters, voices low, passing thermoses of coffee and sizing up the swell. There was no schedule, no sign-up sheet, just a wordless understanding of who had next in the lineup. Dawn Patrol was not about competition. It was about being first in the water, paddling out as the horizon turned pink, sharing the break with friends and strangers alike. Sometimes you recognized the same faces day after day. The kid from Downey with the sun-bleached hair, the lifeguard who always brought his dog, the quiet girl from up the hill who surfed better than half the guys. The etiquette was simple. Wait your turn. Do not snake a wave. If someone wiped out, you helped them get their board back. Stories drifted between sets about a perfect right at Bolsa Chica, a close call with a stingray, last week's party that nobody quite remembered. The ocean was a great equalizer. Suits and jobs did not matter out here. Everyone was just a silhouette against the morning light, part of a silent procession moving through the water while the rest of the world slept. When the sun finally broke over the hills, the session was almost over. Boards were rinsed off, towels slung over shoulders, and cars packed up for the drive to school or work. But for a few hours, the beach belonged to the Dawn Surfers, a tribe bound by salt, wax, and the promise of another perfect wave. A stack of Disneyland ticket books sat heavy in your hand, each one a rainbow of promise. The A tickets, easy to spend on the Main Street streetcar or King Arthur's carousel. The D tickets, saved for the monorail or haunted mansion. But the E tickets, those were gold. Space Mountain, the Matterhorn, Pirates of the Caribbean. You would trade, barter, even beg your siblings for an extra E ticket, stretching the magic as far as it could go. Cast members slid the booklets across the counter with a wink, and every torn stub felt like a secret password to adventure. The ritual of choosing a ride, of weighing what was left in your booklet, made each moment feel earned, every line, every laugh, every story retold on the drive home. Summer afternoons drifted toward dusk, and the world shifted from sand and sun to neon and music. In the valley, drive-in theaters blinked to life, roller rinks spun under mirrored balls, and transistor radios hummed with the latest hits. Teens lined up for the arcade, quarters sweaty in their palms, or laced up skates for a night that felt endless. The air inside a roller rink was a blend of popcorn, cologne, and disco. A DJ perched above the crowd, stacks of vinyl at his side, calling out dedications and spinning tracks that made the floor pulse. Couples held hands, shy and hopeful, circling under colored lights. Friends formed trains, laughter echoing off the walls. Each song was a memory pressed into muscle and bone, a soundtrack to a freedom that belonged to everyone for the price of a ticket or a borrowed pair of skates. These rituals, paper tickets, neon nights, the thump of a favorite song, stitched community together. They were the texture of everyday life, as real and necessary as sunshine and salt air. The wide-open California dream began to tighten its grip in the late 1970s. On June 6, 1978, nearly two-thirds of voters approved Proposition 13, a sweeping tax revolt that cut property taxes by more than half overnight. For homeowners, the measure meant relief. Tax bills dropped, and longtime residents could stay put. But the aftershocks rippled through every street and schoolyard. Local governments lost billions in revenue, and public schools faced sudden budget shortfalls. Class sizes swelled, libraries cut hours, and summer programs disappeared. The promise of a good education, once a given in most neighborhoods, began to fade for many families. City budgets shrank, and towns looked for new ways to raise money. Instead of building more homes, many shifted their focus to shopping centers, car dealerships, and office parks, anything that could bring in sales tax. New housing starts slowed, and the supply of affordable homes dried up. As prices climbed, first-time buyers found themselves locked out of neighborhoods their parents once took for granted. The landscape of opportunity changed in other ways too. With fewer homes near job centers, workers moved farther out, chasing affordable rents in distant suburbs. Commute times stretched longer each year. What had been a 20-minute drive in the mid-70s soon became an hour or more. The daily traffic crawl along the freeways became a new ritual, a sign that the Golden State's easy access was slipping away. The dream of California, steady jobs, good schools, a home within reach, didn't vanish overnight. But after 1978, it grew harder to find. For many, the doors that once swung open so easily now seemed to close a little faster, leaving the next generation to wonder if the promise was still theirs to claim. California's golden age wasn't just geography. It was a mindset fueled by freedom, creativity, and community. Today, as median home prices exceed 10 times the average income, and as tech reshapes every corner, the old promise feels distant. But the longing for simplicity and belonging endures. Sometimes the real inheritance of an era is how it reminds us what is still worth reclaiming. Share your own memories or dreams below.